The late afternoon sun stretched over the Carter household, casting soft golden rays through the large bay window in the living room. The scent of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air, mixing with the faint aroma of Ava's vanilla-scented candles. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that settles before something unshakable happens. Ava Carter moved slowly through the kitchen, her 8-month pregnant belly making every step feel heavier than the last. She set a bag of groceries on the counter and exhaled, brushing loose curls away from her damp forehead. From the living room, Jordan Carter's voice rang out thick with excitement. "Babe, you won't believe this. This rookie just pulled off a 60-yard run like it was nothing. He made the defense look stupid." Ava smiled to herself as she reached for a glass of water. Football, always football. It was Jordan's first love, his lifelong dream, the one thing that had defined him for as long as she had known him. Even now, years after his career-ending knee injury, he still clung to the game, watching, analyzing, reminiscing. She waddled into the living room, lowering herself onto the couch beside him. Jordan's dark eyes never left the screen, his body tense as he watched the slow-motion replay. 60 yards, huh? She teased, resting a hand on her belly. "Think our little one's got your talent?" Jordan finally turned his head, a wide grin spreading across his face. His eyes softened as he reached over and placed his palm against her belly. "Oh, no doubt," he said. "Kid's gonna be a beast on the field, gonna have speed, agility, maybe even my legendary footwork." Ava raised an eyebrow. "Legendary? Is that what you're calling it now?" Jordan laughed, rubbing slow circles over her stomach. "What, you don't remember? Senior year, last game before state championships? Broke through 2 tackles, juked a linebacker so bad he fell on his ass, and then got tackled 5 seconds later," Ava finished, smirking. Jordan feigned offense. "Unbelievable. You're supposed to be my biggest fan." Ava giggled, tilting her head against his shoulder. His arm wrapped around her, holding her close. It was in these small moments, the teasing, the easy laughter, the quiet understanding, that she felt the safest. Everything about their life together felt right. Sure, money was tight. Jordan worked a regular job at a local gym, training high school athletes, while Ava taught elementary school. They didn't have the flashy lifestyle some of his former teammates had, but they had something better: love, stability, a future. And now, they had Noah. Jordan pressed a soft kiss against her temple. "You nervous?" Ava exhaled, staring down at her belly. "A little. It's a lot to take in. But I'm excited too. I mean, we're about to be parents." Jordan smiled. "We're gonna be good at it." Ava squeezed his hand. "Yeah, we are." Jordan leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Just promise me one thing." If Noah doesn't like football, you have to be the one to tell me. Because I might not survive it." Ava burst into laughter, shaking her head. "Deal." For a moment the world felt perfect, and for a while it was, until it wasn't. It was 2:14 a.m. when Ava's water broke. The contraction hit like a tidal wave, wrenching her from sleep with a sharp, breath-stealing pain. She sat up, gasping, clutching at the sheets. Jordan jolted awake beside her. "Ava?" His voice was groggy, thick with sleep. Her fingers dug into his arm. "It's happening." For a moment he just stared, blinking away the haze of sleep. Then he shot out of bed, scrambling for the hospital bag they had packed weeks ago. "All right, okay, shoes, car keys, where's my damn phone?" Ava gritted her teeth as another contraction hit. "Jordan, move." They made it to the hospital in record time. The next few hours blurred into a haze of pain, exhaustion, and frantic encouragement from nurses. Jordan never left her side, holding her hand through every unbearable contraction, whispering reassurances even as she screamed, "You got this, babe. Almost there." Ava clung to his voice, his touch, his presence. And then finally, relief. A sharp, piercing cry filled the delivery room. Ava let out a breathless, tearful laugh. "Is he okay?" "Let me see him." The doctor hesitated, just for a moment, but Ava saw it. She turned her head, searching Jordan's face for the same reaction, but he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the baby, and the blood drained from his face. Ava's pulse pounded. Something was wrong. The nurse wrapped Noah in a soft blue blanket and placed him in Ava's arms. She looked down, and her breath caught. Noah's skin was pale, almost paper white. His eyes were blue, not the rich brown she had imagined, and his tiny curls weren't dark, like hers or Jordan's. They were golden. Her fingers trembled. Jordan took a step back. His entire body was stiff, his expression unreadable. Ava looked up at him, her stomach twisting in knots. Jordan. He didn't answer, didn't even blink. For the first time since they had met, Ava saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Doubt. Jordan sat in the dim hospital waiting room, his foot tapping anxiously against the tiled floor. His heart was pounding, his mind raced. That baby wasn't his, it couldn't be. Jordan shut his eyes, breathing hard. Every part of him wanted to believe Ava, wanted to trust her, but how could he? How could he explain what he had just seen? They were both mixed race. He knew what his family looked like, what Ava's family looked like, and yet Noah looked like neither of them. A cold sweat prickled his skin. Had she? No. Ava would never, but then again. How could he be sure? His stomach twisted. He had never felt this kind of anger before, this kind of betrayal, and as he sat in the empty waiting room, staring at his hands, one thought repeated in his mind like a deafening drumbeat. That's not my baby. The hospital room felt too small, the air thick with an unspoken tension that clung to the walls like damp wallpaper. Ava sat upright in bed, exhaustion settling deep into her bones, her arms wrapped protectively around Noah's tiny body. She could still feel the dull ache of labor, the weight of sleepless hours pressing against her skull, but none of it compared to the ache in her chest as she watched Jordan stand near the window, silent, stiff, barely looking at her. She had never seen him like this. Jordan was never quiet. He was the man who filled every space he entered, always laughing, always talking, never the one who let silence speak for him. But now silence was a blade, and it was cutting her apart. Ava swallowed hard, shifting Noah against her chest. Jordan, talk to me. He didn't answer. He hadn't spoken a word since she called his name in the delivery room. Not on the way here. Not when the nurses handed her Noah. Not when the doctor checked her vitals and cleared her for release. Just silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Ava tightened her grip on Noah, her pulse hammering against her ribs. Please, she whispered, her voice barely holding steady. Jordan finally turned. His eyes were dark, unreadable, his jaw clenched so tightly that she could see the muscle twitch. Then finally his first words, "Whose baby is that?" The room tilted. Ava's breath caught, her fingers stiffening around the soft blanket wrapped around Noah. She had expected doubt, had seen the shock in his face when Noah was born. But this was something else entirely. She shook her head, a disbelieving, breathless laugh escaping her lips. Are you serious? Jordan's fists clenched at his sides. Look at him, Ava. His voice was low, rough, like it hurt to even say the words. Look at him, and tell me I'm wrong. Ava's stomach twisted violently. Her gaze dropped to Noah's tiny face, his delicate, porcelain-pale skin. He was so small, so perfect, but she couldn't deny it. She saw what Jordan saw. Noah looked different, but that didn't mean. Her fingers curled into the blanket as she looked up again, her heart pounding in her throat. You think I cheated on you? Jordan didn't answer right away. His gaze flickered, hesitation, doubt, something breaking inside of him, but then he set his jaw. What am I supposed to think? He bit out. Ava, I've been trying, God. I have been trying so hard to come up with another explanation, but tell me how the hell two mixed-race parents end up with a white baby. Ava felt the sting of tears behind her eyes. I don't know, she admitted, voice shaking. But I didn't cheat on you. I would never. Then prove it, Jordan snapped. Ava flinched at the sharpness in his voice. What? A DNA test. His voice was clipped, each syllable precise, like he was trying to hold himself together. Let's do one right now. Her breath caught. You really think I'd lie about this? Jordan let out a bitter, hollow laugh, running a hand over his face. I don't know what to think anymore, Ava. All I know is that baby doesn't look like me. He doesn't look like you. And the only explanation that makes sense is, he cut himself off, because saying it out loud would make it real. Ava stood, her body weak, shaking, but her voice stronger now. Jordan, listen to yourself. You think I'd carry another man's child for 9 months and just pretend it was yours? Jordan's fists tightened. I don't know. His voice cracked slightly. I don't know, Ava. He exhaled sharply and took a step back, raking a hand through his hair. Ava stared at him, a sinking feeling creeping into her chest. This wasn't just anger. This was something deeper, something broken. And she suddenly realized Jordan had already made up his mind. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You don't trust me. Jordan flinched, just barely. The silence that followed was louder than anything else in the world. Ava had always thought that if her marriage ended, it would be in slow, agonizing steps. The kind where you feel it coming months in advance, where the love fades gradually, where there's time to fight for what's left. She never imagined it would happen in a single night. She stood in the doorway of their bedroom, Noah in her arms, watching as Jordan threw clothes into a duffel bag. She had begged, pleaded, cried. She had screamed at him, told him that this was insane, that he was making a mistake. But Jordan wasn't listening. He wasn't even looking at her. He just kept packing, like he had already left. Ava's breath came out in sharp, uneven gasps. "You're really leaving us?" Jordan zipped up the bag, his shoulders rising and falling as he exhaled. For a moment, just a moment, he hesitated. Then, in a low, hollow voice, he said, "I'll send someone for the rest of my stuff." Ava felt something inside her snap. "That's it?" she whispered. "You're walking out on your family and that's all you have to say?" Jordan turned to face her. His eyes were red-rimmed, his expression unreadable. "I don't know what else you want from me," he murmured. Ava swallowed hard, rocking Noah gently in her arms. "I want you to be the man I married. I want you to trust me." Jordan clenched his jaw. Then slowly he removed his wedding ring. Ava's breath hitched. He hesitated for half a second, then set it on the dresser. Ava felt everything collapse inside her. Jordan slung the duffel bag over his shoulder, his face unreadable. "Goodbye, Ava." And then he walked out the door, and he didn't look back. The house felt empty without him. Not just physically, though the absence of his clothes in the closet, his shoes by the door, and his watch on the nightstand made it obvious. No, it was something deeper than that. A silence that stretched through every room, a hollowness that settled into the air like a permanent shadow. It had been 2 months since Jordan left. 2 months since he had held Noah, since he had touched Ava, since he had even called. Ava sat in the rocking chair near the window, cradling Noah in her arms as he fussed against her chest. His cries were sharp, piercing, cutting through the quiet like a blade. "I know, baby, I know," she whispered, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "I'm right here." Noah didn't stop. Ava bounced him gently, rubbing soothing circles against his back, but her own hands trembled from lack of sleep. She had barely eaten, barely rested. The bags under her eyes were dark, her body felt fragile, and every night she wondered how much longer she could do this alone. Because she was alone. Jordan hadn't come back, hadn't checked in, hadn't even asked about Noah. At first, she had told herself he just needed time, that eventually he'd realize he made a mistake, that he'd remember the man he used to be. But 2 months had passed, and Jordan was still gone. Ava swallowed the lump in her throat as Noah finally started to quiet, his tiny body going limp against her chest. She pressed a kiss to the top of his soft curls, breathing him in. She had to be strong for him, even if it meant doing this without Jordan, even if it meant accepting that Jordan wasn't coming back. Jordan told himself he did the right thing. He had to believe that, because if he let himself question it, if he let himself wonder if he had made a mistake, then the weight of what he had done would be too much to carry. He was living in a new city now, working at a sports training facility, surrounding himself with people who didn't know him, people who didn't know what he had left behind. His old friends asked about Ava sometimes, asked about the baby. He always brushed it off. "We don't talk anymore." They would nod, assume the worst about her, and Jordan never corrected them. Because if they believed Ava had betrayed him, then maybe, just maybe, he could keep believing it too. But some nights, when he was alone in his apartment, when the silence became too heavy, he'd think about the way she had looked at him in the hospital, the way her voice had cracked when she said, "You don't trust me," the way Noah's tiny fingers had curled around hers as she held him close, even as Jordan had stepped away. And on those nights, he couldn't sleep, because no matter how hard he tried to push it away, a small, nagging voice whispered in the back of his mind, "What if you were wrong?" It started slowly. At first, Ava barely noticed. Noah was just a few months old, his features were still changing. Babies did that. But then, one evening, as she was bathing him in the sink, she noticed something she couldn't ignore. His skin. It wasn't as pale as before. It was darkening. Ava froze, her hands still submerged in the warm water as she studied him. Noah blinked up at her, his tiny fingers splashing against the bubbles, completely unaware of how much his existence had already been questioned. Ava's breath caught. It wasn't just his skin. His blonde hair, the thing Jordan had fixated on the most, was darkening too. Not all at once, but strand by strand, deepening into something closer to chestnut brown. Her pulse pounded. She lifted him from the water, wrapping him in a soft towel, her mind racing. What if? No, it wasn't possible. Or was it? Ava grabbed her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she searched for answers. And then she found it. Other cases, mixed-race parents whose children were born with white passing features, only to develop melanin over time. Her stomach dropped. It was rare, but it happened. It was real. She had been telling the truth all along. Jordan had left them over nothing. Ava let out a shaking breath, her fingers tightening around her phone. She should call him, tell him what was happening. But then a much darker thought surfaced. Would it even matter? Would he even believe her now? And even if he did he even deserve to come back? By the time Noah was 6, he was obsessed with football. Not just a little, obsessed. Ava didn't even know how it happened. They didn't watch games in the house. She never talked about Jordan's past, never encouraged it, but Noah had found his way to it anyway. It started with a small foam football he carried everywhere. Then one day at the park, he had watched some older kids playing and begged to join. Ava had let him, and that was all it took. From that day forward, he was unstoppable. He ran plays in their small backyard, practiced footwork in the driveway, studied game highlights on YouTube, even when Ava tried to make him watch something else. Football was in his blood, even if he didn't know it yet. And the cruelest part? He played just like Jordan. Every time Ava watched him sprint across the grass, his curls bouncing, his focused expression a perfect mirror of his father's, it broke something inside her. Because Noah had no idea who he really was, and Jordan had no idea what he had walked away from. It was supposed to be a normal night. Jordan was flipping through channels, half paying attention to the TV as he ate dinner. Then suddenly, Noah Carter, the rising young star, is already making waves in the junior league. Jordan froze. His fork slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the plate. He turned slowly, his breath caught in his throat. The screen showed a young boy, maybe 10 years old, running across a football field with effortless speed. His jersey clung to his frame, his dark curls bouncing as he juked past defenders. He was fast, precise, confident. Jordan's stomach twisted violently. Carter, Ava's last name. The camera zoomed in. The boy turned slightly, his face fully visible. Jordan stopped breathing. Noah's hazel eyes, his hazel eyes, stared back at him through the screen. And in that moment, everything collapsed. Noah was his son, and Jordan had made the worst mistake of his life. The dim light from the television flickered against the walls of Jordan Carter's apartment, casting shadows over the mess of unopened takeout containers and empty beer bottles on the coffee table. He wasn't paying attention to the game on the screen. He hadn't been paying attention to football in a long time. Not since that night. The night he walked away from his family. Jordan shifted on the couch, rubbing his hands over his face, the weight of exhaustion settling into his bones. It had been years since he left. Years since he had seen Ava, since he had held his son in his arms. His son. The thought made his stomach twist violently. He wasn't sure if he had the right to call Noah that anymore. He had given up that right the night he chose doubt over love. He had tried to move on, tried to convince himself he made the right choice, but no matter where he went, no matter how many years passed, he couldn't outrun the feeling that he had made a terrible mistake. And then, one evening, everything changed. He had been flipping through channels mindlessly, barely listening to the commentators when something caught his ear. Noah Carter, the rising young star, is already making waves in the junior league. Experts say he's got the makings of a future pro. Jordan froze. The name, Carter. His breath caught in his throat. His fingers tightened around the remote as he turned his gaze to the screen. And then, he saw him. A boy, tall, athletic, his dark curls bouncing as he ran across the field, moving with an effortless grace that was too familiar to ignore. Jordan's heart pounded. He felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. It was like looking in a mirror. Noah's footwork, his speed, his body language. It was all him. His son, the boy he abandoned. The truth crashed over him like a tidal wave. He had spent years believing he had been wronged. He had let his own pride and insecurities convince him that Ava had betrayed him, but she never had. Noah was his. He had always been his. Jordan's stomach churned as he leaned forward, his elbows pressing into his knees. He tried to swallow, but his throat was dry. All those years, all those lost years, Noah had grown up without him, because of him. He wanted to turn off the TV, to look away, but he couldn't, because now he had to face what he had done. Jordan had always been good at ignoring his emotions. Growing up, football had been his escape, his way of channeling every frustration, every regret, every pain into something physical. He never had to talk about his feelings. He never had to sit with them. But now, as he stood outside Ava's house, staring at the front door that had once been his home, he had nowhere left to run. His hands trembled. He hadn't seen Ava in 10 years. 10 years since he walked away. 10 years since he left her with a newborn baby and never looked back. What the hell was he doing here? She was never going to forgive him. He wasn't even sure if he wanted her to. Jordan exhaled sharply, rolling his shoulders back. This wasn't about forgiveness. This was about facing the truth. He took a deep breath and knocked. Silence. Then, footsteps. The door swung open, and there she was, Ava. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She looked exactly the same and yet completely different. The same full curls, the same sharp eyes that used to hold nothing but warmth when she looked at him. But now they were cold. Ava's fingers tightened on the door handle. Jordan. His name on her lips felt like a knife to the gut. He swallowed hard. Ava. More silence. She didn't invite him in. He didn't expect her to. Finally, Ava crossed her arms. Why are you here? Jordan exhaled, glancing at the ground for a moment before looking back up at her. I was wrong. His voice was quiet but steady. Ava's jaw clenched. She didn't soften. She didn't say anything, so he kept going. I should have listened to you. I should have stayed. He let out a shaky breath. I wanted to tell you that. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything from you. His eyes flickered with something raw, something vulnerable. I just needed you to know. Ava stared at him for a long time, expression unreadable. Then finally she spoke. You destroyed me. Jordan's chest tightened. Her voice was steady, but the weight of those words hit him harder than any tackle he had ever taken on the field. I know. His voice broke. I know, Ava. She inhaled sharply, looking away for a second before shaking her head. You don't get to show up 10 years later and expect closure. I don't want closure, he admitted. I wanted to see him. Ava flinched. Jordan swallowed. Please, Ava. I just want to see my son. A long silence stretched between them. Then from behind her, a voice. Mom? Jordan stiffened. Ava turned, and then he saw him. Noah, standing in the hallway, watching. Jordan's heart stopped, because Noah was him. The same sharp hazel eyes, the same stance, the same presence, and Noah was staring right at him. For a long moment neither of them spoke, but they didn't have to, because in that moment, Jordan knew. His son knew exactly who he was. Noah Carter stood in the dimly lit hallway, a football tucked under his arm, his brows drawn together in cautious confusion. He wasn't a little kid anymore. At 10 years old, he stood tall for his age, his broad shoulders and athletic build a mirror image of the man standing at the door. His curly dark hair was cropped short, his skin a warm caramel tone, no trace left of the pale baby his father once doubted. Noah didn't move, didn't speak. His sharp hazel eyes flicked between his mother and the stranger at the door. But Jordan saw it, the way recognition flickered across Noah's face. Jordan swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry as sandpaper. His son was standing in front of him, and he had no idea what to say. Ava took a step forward, subtly placing herself between them, her posture protective. Noah, she said, her voice careful. Go back inside. Noah didn't budge. Who is he? Jordan's chest tightened. It was the first time he had ever heard his son's voice, and God, it hit him like a train. Deep, steady, strong, like him. Ava hesitated, glancing at Jordan briefly before turning back to Noah. No one important, she said. Jordan flinched. Noah narrowed his eyes. Then why does he look like me? Silence. Jordan exhaled sharply, his shoulders tense, his throat thick with emotion. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. I'm your father. Noah's grip on the football tightened. His expression didn't change, didn't twist with surprise, didn't soften, didn't even flicker with curiosity. He just stared at Jordan, his gaze unreadable. Ava's jaw clenched. Jordan, but Noah spoke first. Why are you here now? Jordan felt the words like a punch to the ribs. No anger, no sadness, just a cold, detached question. It was a fair one. Jordan had no right to expect anything more. He licked his dry lips, forcing himself to hold Noah's gaze. Because I made a mistake. Noah studied him carefully, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. Then, after a long, tense beat, he turned to Ava. Mom, is that true? Ava inhaled sharply. Her lips pressed together, her eyes conflicted. Then, quietly, soft but firm, she said, yes. Noah's fingers twitched, his only reaction. Then finally he nodded. Okay. And without another word he turned and walked away. The house was silent. Ava stood in the living room, arms crossed tightly, her posture stiff. Jordan sat across from her, perched on the edge of the couch, his elbows braced against his knees. The air between them was thick. 10 years of pain and anger, and unanswered questions coiling like a storm ready to break. Finally, Ava exhaled. What do you want from me, Jordan? Jordan ran a hand over his face. Nothing. He swallowed. I don't want anything from you. Ava scoffed. Bullshit. Jordan's gaze flicked up. I mean it. Silence. Then soft, hesitant, he said, I just wanted to see him. Ava's expression didn't soften. You don't get to do that. I know. Jordan's voice was raw. I know I don't deserve it. Ava exhaled, shaking her head. I spent years, Jordan, trying to make peace with the fact that you weren't coming back. You didn't call. You didn't ask. You just... Her voice broke slightly. She swallowed and forced herself to steady. You just disappeared. Jordan's jaw tensed. I was wrong. Ava let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, you were. More silence. Then finally the real question. Why now, she whispered. Why show up now after all this time? Jordan hesitated. He could have told her the truth, that he had seen Noah on TV, that he had felt something in his chest shatter when he realized what he had done. But that wasn't the whole truth. The truth was, he had spent 10 years running from this moment, and when he saw Noah on that screen, he knew he couldn't run anymore. So instead, he said simply, because I had to. Ava studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then finally she sighed. You want to see him? Jordan's breath caught. He nodded. Ava looked down, shaking her head. Then reluctantly she turned toward the hallway. Noah? She called out. There was a beat of silence. Then footsteps. Jordan's heart hammered as Noah reappeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Ava hesitated, glancing at him before looking back at her son. Do you want to talk to him? Noah didn't answer right away. Then finally he shrugged. I guess. It wasn't much, but it was something. Ava exhaled, rubbing her forehead. All right, I'm gonna give you 2 minutes. She turned toward Jordan, her eyes hard. 1 minute, then without another word, she walked away. And just like that, Jordan was alone with his son. His 10-year-old son. A boy he had never met. A boy who was staring at him now, expectantly. Jordan's chest felt tight. He had no idea where to start, but he had to try, so he did. Hey, kid. His voice was quiet, hesitant. Noah blinked at him. Then after a long pause he said, Hey, and Jordan felt like he could finally breathe. It was 3 months later when Jordan found himself sitting in the stands of a packed stadium, watching Noah play. The air was electric, the roar of the crowd vibrating through the bleachers. Jordan sat quietly, his fingers laced together, his eyes locked on the field. He wasn't here as a father. He wasn't here to force his way back into Noah's life. He was just here, watching. That was enough. Noah sprinted down the field, cutting between defenders with an ease that made Jordan's chest ache. Then, just before kickoff, something happened. Noah glanced toward the stands. His eyes flicked up, and he saw him. Jordan didn't move, didn't wave, didn't call out, but Noah saw him, and for the first time his expression changed. No words, no gestures, just a look, a quiet understanding. Then, just before the play, Noah did something small but unmistakable. He raised his fist in the air, the same way Jordan used to after every win. Jordan sucked in a sharp breath, and as Noah turned back to the game, Jordan felt something settle inside him. He may never be the father Noah needed, but maybe, just maybe, he could still be something.